How good was Joe Montana actually? 4 Super Bowls, 0 interceptions. Read that again. Joe Montana played in 4 of the biggest games in the history of professional football. Threw 122 passes across those 4 games, found the end zone 11 times, and never once put the ball in the wrong hands. Not once. No other quarterback in the history of the sport can say that. Not Tom Brady, not Terry Bradshaw, not Peyton Manning, nobody. His career Super Bowl passer rating sits at 127.8. That is the highest of any quarterback who has ever taken a snap in a Super Bowl. And it is not particularly close. He completed 68% of his passes under the brightest lights the sport has to offer, and he did it in an era when defensive backs could mug receivers at the line of scrimmage, when pass interference was barely called, when the quarterback was fair game the moment the ball left his hand. Montana engineered 31 fourth-quarter comebacks during his career. 31 times a game looked lost, and 31 times Joe Cool walked into the huddle and changed the ending. He led the NFL in passer rating 5 times. He led the league in completion percentage 5 times. He won 2 league MVP awards, 3 Super Bowl MVP awards, and made 8 Pro Bowls across 15 seasons. At the time of his retirement, he held every major career postseason passing record. Most attempts, most completions, most yards, most touchdowns. He was the gold standard for what a playoff quarterback was supposed to look like. But here is the number that separates Montana from every other name in the conversation. In the 1989 postseason alone, he threw 11 touchdowns and 0 interceptions across 3 games. 11 touchdowns, 0 picks. In the playoffs, his passer rating for that single postseason was 146.4. That is not a typo. That is a man playing a different sport than everyone else on the field. And the most terrifying part, the opponents knew what was coming. They knew the West Coast offense. They knew the short passing game. They knew Montana was going to pick them apart with surgical 5-yard completions that somehow turned into 10-yard gains. And they still could not stop it. Coaches designed entire game plans around containing one man, and he still completed 22 of 29 passes for 297 yards and 5 touchdowns in the biggest game of the season. You think you know how good Joe Montana was. You do not. And by the end of this, you may struggle to name anyone who played the quarterback position better. Joseph Clifford Montana Jr. was born on the 11th of June, 1956, in the small borough of New Eagle, Pennsylvania. He grew up just down the road in Monongahela, a coal mining town wedged along the banks of the Monongahela River, about 25 miles south of Pittsburgh. It was a working-class town built on steel and coal, a place where immigrants from Italy and Eastern Europe had settled decades earlier, chasing the promise of honest labor and a better life. The Montana family fit that mold perfectly. Joe's paternal ancestors came from the Camonica Valley in northern Italy. The family name had originally been Montani before it was Americanized. His mother, Teresa Marie Bavuso, was of Sicilian descent. It was a tight-knit Italian-American household, Catholic and disciplined, where family meals and hard work were not negotiable. Joe was an only child. That detail matters more than it might seem. With no siblings to compete against in the backyard, his father became his primary opponent, his coach, and his greatest motivator all at once. Joseph Sr. was a finance company manager during the day, but in the evenings, he was the architect of his son's athletic future. Before Joe could even walk steadily, his father had placed a baseball bat in his tiny hands. Later came the basketball hoop in the driveway, and the tire swing hung from a tree, through which young Joe would throw footballs for hours, refining an accuracy that would one day terrorize NFL defenses from coast to coast. His childhood hero was Joe Namath, the swaggering quarterback of the New York Jets and a fellow Pennsylvania native. It was Namath's confidence and flair that captivated the young Montana, planting the earliest seeds of what would become his own legendary poise under pressure. But football was not the only sport the kid dominated. Not even close. In Little League Baseball, Montana batted .500 and pitched 3 perfect games. 3. By the time he was 15, he could high jump 6 feet 9 inches, a mark that would have been competitive at many college track programs. Basketball was actually his favorite sport growing up, not football, and he played every position on the court at Gold High School with enough skill that North Carolina State University offered him a basketball scholarship. Let that sink in. One of the greatest football players who ever lived nearly became a college basketball player instead. At Ringgold High, Montana was the definition of a multi-sport star. He quarterbacked the football team with a maturity beyond his years, ran the basketball offense with the vision of a point guard, and was a standout on the baseball diamond. He was a B student, sang in the school choir, and served as vice president of his senior class. By every measure, he was the golden boy of Monongahela. But there was a catch, and it would haunt him through the draft process years later. Montana did not have a cannon for an arm. He was listed at 6 feet 2 and 200 pounds, which was respectable but hardly imposing. He could not throw the ball through a wall the way some of his peers could. Scouts would later describe his arm strength as merely adequate. In an era when evaluators drooled over raw physical tools, Montana's greatest weapon was invisible on a stopwatch or a measuring tape. His genius lived between his ears, in the split-second decisions, in the way he read a difference before the ball was even snapped, in the way he stayed calm when the pocket collapsed and every other quarterback in America would have panicked. Western Pennsylvania is football country. It has produced Joe Namath, Dan Marino, Johnny Unitas, Jim Kelly, and dozens of other NFL players. The region breathes the sport like oxygen. And in the mid-1970s, the next name to emerge from those steel towns was a skinny Italian kid from Monongahela whose arm was not the strongest, whose body was not the biggest, but whose mind was already operating on a level that nobody around him fully understood. Not yet. The question was whether the rest of the world would figure it out before it was too late. And the answer, as it turned out, would come wrapped in chicken soup and a blizzard in Dallas. But we will get there. Joe Montana chose Notre Dame over a basketball scholarship to North Carolina State. He chose the mystique of the Golden Dome, the echoes of Newt Rockne and the Four Horsemen, and the opportunity to play football at the highest level of the college game. It was the right decision for the long run, but in the short term, it nearly broke him. Montana arrived in South Bend, Indiana, in the fall of 1974 as a homesick freshman who immediately found himself buried on the depth chart. Not second string, not third string, 7th string. There were 6 quarterbacks ahead of him, and the coaching staff had no urgent plans to change that. He was a skinny kid from a small town in Pennsylvania, and Notre Dame had no shortage of talented arms. For a young man who had been the best player on every team he had ever joined, the experience was humbling in a way that nothing in his life had prepared him for. His freshman and sophomore years were a study in patience and frustration. Montana saw limited action, mostly in mop-up duty when games were already decided. He showed flashes, enough to keep the coaches interested, but not enough to leapfrog the starters ahead of him. There were moments when he considered transferring. The distance from home weighed on him. The Pennsylvania kid missed his family, missed Monongahela, missed being the center of the action. He spent long stretches on the sideline, watching other quarterbacks run the offense, burning with the quiet certainty that he could do it better. Everything changed during his junior year in 1977. Montana began the season as the third-string quarterback, still buried behind 2 other signal callers. But in the third game of the season, Notre Dame was struggling, and the coaching staff made the decision to send Montana into the fire. He responded with a comeback victory that put the football world on notice. It was not just that he won the game, it was the way he won it. Calm, precise, unfazed by the deficit on the scoreboard or the roar of the crowd. That performance earned him the starting job, and Montana never looked back. He led Notre Dame through the rest of the 1977 season, guiding a once-beaten team to a spot in the national championship conversation. The Fighting Irish finished 11-1 that year, and Montana had gone from an afterthought on the depth chart to the most important player on one of the most storied programs in college football. But the defining moment of his college career, the performance that forged the legend of Joe Montana and earned him the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life, came on New Year's Day, 1979, at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. The weather was brutal. An ice storm had ravaged Dallas the day before, and the temperature at kickoff was accompanied by a wind chill that plunged well below zero. The Cotton Bowl Stadium, which was supposed to hold a sold-out crowd of 76,000, was barely half full. The fans who did show up huddled under blankets and ponchos, shivering through what would become one of the most legendary games in college football history. Notre Dame jumped out to a 12-0 lead against 9th-ranked Houston, and it looked like the Irish would cruise. But the Cougars stormed back. Houston scored 20 unanswered points and took a 20-12 lead into halftime. And Montana, who had been battling the flu all week, was falling apart. His body temperature had dropped to 96 degrees. Hypothermia was setting in. When the teams went to the locker room at halftime, Montana did not come back out. The medical staff wrapped him in blankets in the locker room while his teammates took the field without him. Then came the chicken soup. The daughter of Notre Dame team, Dr. Les Bodnar, had packed chicken noodle soup for her father after seeing the weather forecast. That soup was fed to Montana as he lay shivering under a pile of blankets, his career hanging in the balance between a bowl of broth and the frozen Dallas air. Houston, meanwhile, was destroying Notre Dame. The Cougars scored 2 more touchdowns in the third quarter to take a commanding 34-12 lead. Backup quarterback Tim Kogel, a sophomore who had thrown only 8 passes all year, was helpless to stop the bleeding. And then, somehow, Montana came back. He walked out of that locker room on legs that had no business carrying him and told his teammates he was ready. What followed was the most electrifying fourth quarter in college football history. Notre Dame scored 23 unanswered points in the final period. Steve Sitchie returned a blocked punt for a touchdown to ignite the comeback. Montana found his rhythm despite missing on 10 of his first 11 pass attempts after returning. He ran for 2 touchdowns himself. With just 6 seconds left and the ball on Houston's 8-yard line, Montana took the snap, rolled right, and fired a dart to Chris Haynes, who snagged the ball just above the frozen turf and tumbled into the end zone. The game was tied. Kicker Joe Eunice had to make the extra point twice because of a penalty. He drilled it both times. Notre Dame won 35-34. The chicken soup game. The night the comeback kid was born. Notre Dame later released a promotional film about the fourth quarter called 7.5 Minutes to Destiny. Head coach Dan Devine called it a Joe Montana film. That was exactly right. Everything that Montana would become in the NFL, every clutch drive, every impossible rally, every moment when the world was certain the game was over and Montana proved it was not. The blueprint was drawn in that frozen stadium in Dallas. But despite the legend he had built at Notre Dame, the NFL was not convinced. Scouts loved the story. They loved the moxie. But they looked at the measurables, the arm strength, the frame, the raw tools, and they hesitated. Montana was not the kind of prospect who made scouts pound the table. He was the kind of prospect who made them argue in conference rooms, debating whether heart and intelligence could compensate for what the stopwatch said he lacked. The 1979 NFL Draft would answer that question, and the answer would change professional football forever. 81 players were selected before the San Francisco 49ers called Joe Montana's name in the third round of the 1979 NFL Draft with the 82nd overall pick. 3 quarterbacks went before him. Jack Thompson to the Bengals at the top of the first round, Phil Simms to the Giants' 15th overall, and Steve Fuller to the Chiefs' 23rd overall. Montana was not even the most talked about quarterback in the class. The scouting reports praised his intelligence and poise but flagged concerns about his arm strength, his slight frame, and whether his style of play could translate to the professional level. The man who believed it could was Bill Walsh. Walsh had taken over as head coach of the 49ers in 1979, inheriting a franchise that had won just 2 games the previous season. San Francisco was a laughingstock, the worst team in football, a graveyard for coaches and quarterbacks alike. Walsh was building something from the ground up, and he needed a quarterback who could execute his revolutionary offensive system. It was called the West Coast Offense, a scheme built on short, precise passes, timing routes, and the ability of the quarterback to read a defense and deliver the ball in rhythm. It did not require a rocket arm. It required a surgeon's mind and a musician's timing. Montana was the perfect fit, but Walsh was patient. Montana spent his rookie season as a backup to Steve DeBerg, watching and learning the intricacies of the West Coast system from the sideline. He appeared in all 16 games, but started only 1, attempting just 23 passes over the entire season. It was an apprenticeship, and Montana treated it like one. He studied film obsessively. He absorbed every nuance of Walsh's play calling. He built a rapport with his teammates that went beyond the practice field. And when his number was finally called, he was ready. The transition happened during the 1980 season. Montana took over the starting job and immediately showed why Walsh had believed in him. He led the league in completion percentage as a second-year player, a stunning achievement for a quarterback still learning the professional game. But the 49ers finished 6-10, and Montana's individual brilliance was not yet enough to carry a roster that was still being assembled. The doubters pointed to the record and shrugged. Nice stats, bad team. Can he win? Then came 1981, and everything changed. Walsh had spent 2 years stockpiling talent through the draft and shrewd roster moves. Ronnie Lott, a ferocious safety out of USC, arrived as a first-round pick and immediately transformed the defense. Dwight Clark, Montana's favorite target, was developing into one of the most reliable receivers in the conference. The offensive line was gelling, the defense was getting faster and meaner, and at the center of it all, Montana was evolving from a promising young quarterback into the conductor of the most innovative offense in football. The 49ers went 13-3 in 1981, a jaw-dropping turnaround for a franchise that had been picking in the top 5 just 2 years earlier. Montana threw for 3,565 yards, a career high at that point, and his ability to extend plays with his legs gave Walsh's offense a dimension that no other team could replicate. Defenses would scheme to take away the short passing game, and Montana would scramble out of the pocket and find an open receiver downfield. They would stack the box to stop the run, and Montana would audible into a quick slant that turned into a 30-yard gain. But the moment that defined Montana's arrival, the play that announced to the entire sport that a new dynasty was being born, came on the 10th of January, 1982, at Candlestick Park. The NFC Championship game, San Francisco versus the Dallas Cowboys, the team that had owned the conference for over a decade. Dallas was the establishment, America's team. Tom Landry, Tony Dorsett, Ed Too Tall Jones. They had been to 12 conference championship games in the previous 17 years. They were the gatekeepers of the NFC, and every team that tried to get past them had been sent home, battered and beaten. The 49ers were the upstarts, the team nobody outside the Bay Area took seriously. The experts said San Francisco was a year away, maybe 2. The game was a war. The lead changed hands 6 times. Dallas took a 27-21 lead with less than 5 minutes remaining, and the Cowboys' sideline began to celebrate. Tom Landry was 6 yards away from his 6th Super Bowl. The Cowboys' defense, led by the 6'9", too tall Jones, was snarling and confident. Montana and the 49ers took over at their own 11-yard line with 4 minutes and 54 seconds left, 89 yards away from the end zone. 89 yards between a promising season and a dynasty. Montana was surgical. He mixed running plays and short passes, moving the chains with the precision of a chess grandmaster. 5 runs, 7 completions. The 49ers marched to the Dallas 6-yard line. 3rd and 3. 58 seconds on the clock. Walsh called the play, sprint right option. Montana was supposed to roll right and find Freddie Solomon. If Solomon was covered, the backup read was Dwight Clark running an in-cut across the back of the end zone. Montana took the snap, rolled right, and immediately saw trouble. 3 Dallas defenders, including too tall Jones, were collapsing on him, driving him toward the sideline. Solomon was blanketed. Montana was running out of room, running out of time, running out of options. At the last possible moment, with his feet nearly touching the sideline chalk, Montana pump-faked to freeze the 6'9" Jones and launched a high, arcing pass toward the back of the end zone. The ball seemed destined to sail out of bounds. Too far, no chance, and then Dwight Clark leaped. Clark rose above Dallas cornerback Everson Walls, stretched every inch of his 6'4" frame skyward, and snagged the ball with his fingertips at the apex of his jump. He came down in the end zone. Touchdown. Candlestick Park erupted. The extra point made it 28-27. The Cowboys fumbled on their next possession. The game was over. The 49ers were going to the Super Bowl. The catch. 2 words that would echo through NFL history for decades. Vin Scully was on the call for CBS television. A 4-year-old boy named Tom Brady, sitting in the stands at Candlestick with his family, watched the play unfold and decided he wanted to be a San Francisco 49er when he grew up. A dynasty was born. And the man at the center of it all, the skinny kid from Monongahela, with the average arm and the extraordinary brain, was just getting started. 2 weeks later, Montana led the 49ers to a 26-21 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals in Super Bowl 16. He completed 14 of 22 passes, ran for a touchdown, and won the first of what would become a record 3 Super Bowl MVP awards. San Francisco built a 20-0 halftime lead, survived a Bengals rally that included a legendary goal line stand by the 49ers defense, and walked off the field as world champions for the first time in franchise history. Bill Walsh was carried off the field on the shoulders of his players. Montana walked into the locker room with the quiet satisfaction of a man who always knew this moment was coming. The 49ers had gone from 2 wins to a championship in 3 years. And the quarterback who 81 teams had passed on in the draft was the MVP of the Super Bowl. The doubters were silent, for now. But new questions were already forming. Could he do it again? Was this a fluke? Was Montana a system quarterback riding Walsh's genius? The answers would come soon enough, and they would be delivered with a ruthlessness that the NFL had never seen before. The first Super Bowl proved Montana could win the biggest game on the biggest stage. But the years that followed tested whether he could sustain it. Greatness is not a single performance. It is a decade of them, strung together through injuries and heartbreak, and the relentless churn of a league designed to tear dynasties apart. Montana's evolution from a championship quarterback into the most feared signal caller in football history did not happen overnight. It happened through pain, through doubt, and through a partnership with one receiver who changed everything. The 1982 season was shortened by a player's strike to just 9 games. Montana played well, throwing for 17 touchdowns against 11 interceptions, and the 49ers reached the playoffs. But they were upset by the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game, a bitter reminder that Dallas was not going away quietly. The 1983 season brought another playoff appearance and another early exit. This time, a loss to the Washington Redskins. Montana was putting up strong numbers, earning Pro Bowl selections, completing passes at a rate that led the league. But the team was not getting over the hump. Then came 1984, and the 49ers became a machine. Walsh had been tinkering with the roster, adding pieces that complemented Montana's precision. Roger Craig, a versatile running back out of Nebraska, had developed into a dual threat who could catch passes out of the backfield as effectively as any receiver. Wendell Tyler provided a bruising ground game. The defense, anchored by Ronnie Lott, Keene Turner, and an increasingly dominant front four, was becoming one of the best units in the league. But the critical addition, the one that would define the rest of Montana's career and reshape the 49ers from a very good team into an all-time dynasty, had actually arrived in the 1985 draft. Jerry Rice, wide receiver, Mississippi Valley State, the 89th overall pick in the draft. Walsh saw something in Rice that other teams missed. The speed was obvious. The hands were obvious. But what separated Rice from every other receiver prospect in the class was his ability to create separation on every single route, his relentless work ethic, and his understanding of spacing that seemed almost supernatural for a young player. Walsh paired Rice with Montana, and the result was the most devastating quarterback-receiver combination in the history of professional football. But Rice's impact would take a season to fully manifest. In the meantime, the 1984 49ers were already destroying the league without him. San Francisco went 15-1 during the regular season, the best record in football, and Montana was at the peak of his powers. He threw 28 touchdowns, posted a passer rating of 97.6, and ran Walsh's offense with a fluency that bordered on telepathy. Defenses knew what was coming. They studied the West Coast offense until their eyes burned, and Montana still carved them apart because his processing speed was faster than any defensive adjustment. The playoffs were a coronation. The 49ers dismantled the New York Giants in the divisional round, then obliterated the Chicago Bears 23-0 in the NFC Championship game. The Bears team had recorded 72 sacks during the regular season, the most fearsome pass rush the league had ever seen. Montana made them look pedestrian. He was not sacked once. He threw with such quick timing that the Bears' rushers were still 2 steps away from him when the ball was already in a receiver's hands. Super Bowl 19 against the Miami Dolphins was supposed to be the coronation of Dan Marino, the young Dolphins quarterback, who had just thrown 48 touchdowns and 5,084 yards in the most prolific passing season the league had ever witnessed. Marino was the future. He was the gunslinger with the lightning-quick release and the cannon arm that Montana could only dream about. This was supposed to be his moment. Montana had other plans. San Francisco dismantled Miami 38-16. Montana threw for 331 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 59 yards and another score, becoming the first player in Super Bowl history to throw for 300 yards and run for 50 in the same game. He won his second Super Bowl MVP award, and in the process, he silenced the debate about whether his first championship had been a fluke. The evolution continued. By 1986, Montana had survived a career-threatening back injury that his doctors said should have ended his playing days. In the opening week of the season, he suffered a ruptured disc so severe that surgeons told him he risked paralysis if he continued to play. They recommended retirement. Montana was 29 years old with 2 Super Bowl rings, and the medical community was telling him to walk away. He dropped to 185 pounds during the recovery. His teammates feared the worst. Owner Eddie DeBartolo said publicly that with all due respect to the doctors, what Joe Montana did best was stand behind center, even if he was hurt. 8 weeks later, Montana walked back onto the field at Candlestick Park and threw for 270 yards and 3 touchdowns against the State. Louis Cardinals in a 43-17 rout. He won the Comeback Player of the Year award that season. The back injury had done what no defense in football could do. It had made him miss time, but it could not keep him down. And then Walsh did something that would create the greatest quarterback controversy in NFL history. Before the 1987 season, the 49ers traded for Steve Young, a supremely talented left-hander who had been languishing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Young was fast, strong-armed, and brilliant. He was also a future Hall of Famer. Walsh wanted an insurance policy behind Montana, but what he got was a ticking time bomb of competition that would loom over the franchise for the next 7 years. Montana responded the way champions do. He played with a fury in 1987 that left no room for debate. He led the league in passer rating and touchdown passes. He was named first-team All-Pro for the first time in his career, and the partnership with Jerry Rice was now fully operational. Rice had exploded in his second season, catching 86 passes for more than 1,400 yards, and by 1987, the Montana to Rice connection was the most terrifying combination in football. Montana could throw the ball to a spot before Rice even made his break, and Rice would be there every single time, turning 5-yard receptions into 40-yard gains with his ferocious after-the-catch ability. But the 1987 season ended with a playoff loss to the Minnesota Vikings, and the 1988 season started with Montana on the bench. Young had played well enough in Montana's absence to spark a genuine quarterback controversy. Walsh rotated the two quarterbacks through the first half of the season, and the team limped to a 6-5 record. The locker room was divided. Players who had won championships with Montana were loyal to their leader. Others saw the raw talent in Young and wondered if the future was already in the building. Walsh made his decision. Montana was the starter, and from that moment forward, through the second half of 1988 and into the greatest postseason run of his career, Joe Montana played football with the precision and fury of a man who had been told he was replaceable. He was about to prove, in the most emphatic way imaginable, that he was anything but. The 1988 season was the year the 49ers stopped being a great team and became an immortal one, and the journey to that immortality ran through the most dramatic Super Bowl drive in the history of professional football. San Francisco finished the regular season 10-6, hardly the record of a team destined for a championship. The 6-5 start under the quarterback carousel had left scars, but once Walsh committed to Montana, the 49ers reeled off 4 straight wins to close the season, and Montana was operating Walsh's offense with a precision that defied the rocky beginning. The defense, now featuring Charles Haley as a devastating pass rusher alongside the veteran core of Lott and the secondary, was peaking at the right moment. The playoff path began with a 34-9 demolition of the Minnesota Vikings in the divisional round. Montana threw for 288 yards and 3 touchdowns, picking apart a defense that had been among the league's best. The NFC Championship game against the Chicago Bears was even more decisive, a 28-3 annihilation at Soldier Field. Montana was untouchable. The Bears, once the team that everyone feared, looked confused and overmatched. And then came Super Bowl 23, Cincinnati, again. The Bengals were a legitimate force. Quarterback Boomer Esiason had won the league MVP award that season. Running back Ickey Woods had captivated the nation with his Ickey Shuffle touchdown dance. The Cincinnati defense was anchored by nose tackle Tim Krumrie, one of the most relentless interior linemen in football. This was not a pushover team. This was a squad that had earned its place in the championship game and fully believed it could win. The game was a defensive struggle from the opening snap. Krumrie broke his leg in the first quarter, a gruesome injury that sent shockwaves through the stadium. But the Bengals' defense played on with ferocious intensity. The 49ers managed only field goals for most of the contest. Cincinnati's defense bending but not breaking, containing Montana in a way that few teams had managed all season. The score was just 6-6 heading into the fourth quarter. In a game featuring two of the best offenses in football, the defenses were winning. Then Cincinnati struck. Stanford Jennings returned a kickoff 93 yards for a touchdown to give the Bengals a 13-6 lead. The 49ers answered with a Montana to Rice touchdown to tie it, but kicker Jim Breach drilled a 40-yard field goal with 3 minutes and 20 seconds remaining to put Cincinnati back on top, 16-13. On the Bengals sideline, the celebration began. Players hugged, coaches exhaled. They were 3 minutes away from a world championship, but Chris Collinsworth was not celebrating. The Bengals wide receiver paced the sideline, refusing to join the festivities. He had watched Montana do this before. He knew what was coming. Collinsworth turned to his jubilant teammates and snapped at them. "Are you guys nuts?" he said. "I knew there was too much time left on the clock for Joe Montana." The 49ers took over at their own 8-yard line, 92 yards from the end zone. 3 minutes and 10 seconds on the clock. And in the huddle, with the weight of a championship bearing down on every man in that circle, Montana looked at his right tackle Harris Barton and said something that would become the most famous aside in Super Bowl history. "Hey H," Montana said. Barton looked at him. "Check it out. Look down there in the other end zone. You see him? There's John Candy down there eating popcorn." The entire huddle turned around and looked, and sure enough, the Canadian comedian was sitting in the end zone seats, munching on popcorn, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just been spotted by the coolest quarterback on the planet in the biggest moment of the biggest game of the year. The tension broke, the players laughed, and Montana, having reminded his teammates that this was still just a game, went to work. The drive was 11 plays and 92 yards of surgical brilliance. Montana completed 8 of 9 passes. He found Rice 3 times for 51 yards, including a 27-yard strike on 2nd and 20 that might have been the single most important completion of his career. He found Roger Craig. He found John Frank. He methodically sliced through a Cincinnati defense that knew exactly what he was going to do and could not stop him from doing it. With 34 seconds remaining, the ball sat on the Cincinnati 10-yard line. Montana took the snap. The play called for 3 options: Roger Craig coming in motion, Jerry Rice running a crossing route, and John Taylor running a skinny post. Craig went the wrong direction. The defense jumped toward Rice. Taylor broke across the middle alone, and Montana fired a pass that split the coverage like a laser. Taylor catches it. Touchdown. San Francisco leads 20-16. The stadium erupts. Montana pumps his fists and breaks into a wide grin. He has done it again in 92-11 plays, 3 minutes and 10 seconds. The greatest drive in Super Bowl history. Randy Cross, the veteran center who had been with Montana since the beginning, said it best after the game. "I just hope now they'll stop saying he's right up there with the best. He's the greatest big game player I've seen. Period." From the losing locker room, Boomer Esiason captured the devastation. You are 34 seconds away from a glorious victory, and the next thing you know, you are using all the cliches you use in a losing locker room. When you come so close to the top of the mountain and lose it this way, it really hurts. And from Sports Illustrated, the line that captured what everyone in football already knew: Montana is not human. I don't want to call him a god, but he's somewhere in between. Bill Walsh retired after that Super Bowl, the architect of the West Coast offense, the man who had drafted Montana, who had built the system that made Montana's genius visible to the world, walked away from coaching with 3 championships and a legacy that would reshape the sport forever. George Seifert took over as head coach, and the question immediately became whether the 49ers could win without Walsh's play-calling genius. The 1989 season answered that question with an exclamation point. Montana was transcendent. He threw for 3,520 yards and 26 touchdowns with only 8 interceptions. His passer rating of 112.4 set a new single-season NFL record. He won his first league MVP award. He was also named the AP Offensive Player of the Year, the AP Athlete of the Year, and Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year. He was, by any statistical or observational measure, the best player in professional football, playing the best football of his career at the age of 33. The playoffs were not competitive. The 49ers annihilated the Minnesota Vikings 41-13 in the divisional round. Montana carved up a Vikings defense that had recorded 71 sacks during the regular season, the second highest total in NFL history. Chris Dolman and Keith Millard, two of the most feared pass rushers on the planet, could not get near him. The NFC Championship was even more lopsided, a 30-3 rout of the Los Angeles Rams. Montana threw for 262 yards and 2 touchdowns without breaking a sweat. And then came Super Bowl 24 against the Denver Broncos and John Elway, the quarterback who represented everything Montana was not. Elway was 6'6", threw the ball with a bazooka arm, and could outrun most linebackers. He was the classic prototype quarterback, the kind of player scouts fell in love with at the Combine. He had already taken the Broncos to 2 Super Bowls and lost both in humiliating fashion. This was supposed to be his redemption arc. It became his nightmare instead. Montana was perfect. Not figuratively perfect. Literally, mechanically, historically perfect. He completed 22 of 29 passes for 297 yards and a Super Bowl record 5 touchdowns. He completed 13 consecutive passes at one stretch, another Super Bowl record. His passer rating for the game was 147.6. 3 of his 5 touchdowns went to Jerry Rice, who caught 7 passes for 148 yards. The 49ers scored 55 points, the most in Super Bowl history, a record that still stands. The margin of victory was 45 points, also a record. Denver's defense had allowed an average of just 14.1 points per game during the regular season. Montana scored 55 on them. Broncos defensive tackle Greg Craggan captured the helplessness perfectly. "He is virtually unstoppable," Craggan said. "You think you can put together some kind of game plan to slow him down, but nobody has." Montana walked off the field at the Louisiana Superdome to a standing ovation with 10 minutes and 50 seconds still remaining in the fourth quarter. He raised his helmet to the crowd. He had won his 4th Super Bowl, his 3rd Super Bowl MVP, and had posted career Super Bowl numbers that read like a fantasy. 83 of 122 for 1,142 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. 0 in 4 Super Bowls against 4 different defenses. Across 9 years of championship football, Joe Montana never once threw a pick. The 49ers tied the Pittsburgh Steelers with 4 Super Bowl victories. They became the first team to win back-to-back championships with different head coaches. And Montana had established himself, beyond any reasonable argument, as the greatest quarterback to ever play the game. The 1990 season brought a 5th straight NFC West title and Montana's 2nd consecutive league MVP award. He threw for 3,944 yards, 26 touchdowns, and his passer rating remained among the league's best. The 49ers were favored to become the first team to win 3 consecutive Super Bowls. But in the NFC Championship game against the New York Giants, disaster struck. The Giants' defense, led by the ferocious Lawrence Taylor and a punishing front 7, was built to destroy quarterbacks. And on a blitz in the 4th quarter, defensive end Leonard Marshall blindsided Montana with a hit so violent that it fractured a bone in his hand, bruised his sternum, bruised his abdomen, and cracked a rib. Montana was carried off the field on a stretcher. Steve Young came in and nearly rallied the 49ers, but Roger Craig fumbled late. The Giants recovered, and Matt Barr kicked a last-second field goal to end San Francisco's three-peat dreams, 15-13. Montana lay in the medical tent, broken and battered, watching the final minutes of a game he could no longer control. He did not know it at the time, but the greatest chapter of his career had just ended. The Leonard Marshall hit did not just knock him out of the NFC Championship game. It knocked him out of San Francisco, out of his prime, and out of the only football home he had ever known. But the full weight of that loss and the injury that followed would not become clear until later, because the hardest blow was still coming. The hit from Leonard Marshall in the 1990 NFC Championship game was just the beginning. The following summer, during the 1991 preseason, Montana suffered a torn tendon in his right elbow. His throwing elbow, the elbow that had delivered 4 Super Bowl championships, 3 Super Bowl MVP performances, and some of the most iconic passes in the history of professional sports. The surgery to repair it was complex, and the recovery timetable was measured not in weeks but in months. Montana missed the entire 1991 season. He missed almost all of 1992. For nearly 2 full years, the most prolific postseason quarterback in NFL history could not throw a football. During his absence, Steve Young stepped into the starting role and flourished. Young posted a passer rating of 101.8 1991 and won the league MVP award in 1992 with a rating of 107. He was not merely keeping the seat warm. He was proving that he was an elite quarterback in his own right, a future Hall of Famer who could run Walsh's offense with a style and explosiveness that was uniquely his. The locker room split. Some players remained fiercely loyal to Montana, the man who had led them to championships. Others believed Young was the future, and that clinging to the past was holding the franchise back. Montana finally returned for the final game of the 1992 regular season, a Monday Night Football contest against the Detroit Lions. He came in during the second half and played brilliantly, reminding everyone in the building why he was Joe Montana. The crowd at Candlestick erupted. For one evening, it felt like the old days. But there would be no dramatic reclamation of the starting job. The 49ers had made their choice. George Seifert, the head coach, declared Young the starter without holding an open competition. Montana was devastated. He had given 13 years to the franchise, had built the dynasty from nothing, had delivered 4 championships, and now he was being told that his services were no longer needed. Montana later put it plainly in an interview, "I'm better than he is." It was not arrogance, it was the conviction of a man who had proven it on every stage the sport could offer. But the 49ers were looking forward, not backward, and Montana requested a trade rather than allow the controversy to tear the locker room apart further. On the 20th of April, 1993, the San Francisco 49ers traded Joe Montana to the Kansas City Chiefs. The deal sent Montana and safety David Whitmore to Kansas City in exchange for a first-round draft pick. When the news broke, it felt like the end of an era because it was. Montana held a press conference alongside team executives, his voice steady but his eyes telling a different story. The man who had engineered the catch, who had spotted John Candy in the end zone during the greatest drive in Super Bowl history, who had come back from chicken soup and hypothermia and a ruptured disc and a shattered elbow, was leaving the only NFL home he had ever known. Steve Young later described finding out about the trade by hearing it on his car radio. He pulled over. He sat in silence. The weight of succeeding the most beloved quarterback in San Francisco history settled onto his shoulders, and it would be years before he could fully carry it. For Montana, the trade was not just a football transaction. It was a severance from an identity he had built over more than a decade. The red and gold jersey, the fog rolling over Candlestick Park, the roar of the crowd when number 16 jogged onto the field, all of it was gone. And what was left was a 36-year-old quarterback with a surgically repaired elbow, 2 years of rust, and something to prove to a league that had already begun writing his eulogy. There is a moment in every legend story when the world stops caring about the future and starts mourning the past. For Montana, that moment happened in the spring of 1993, and his response to it would reveal something profound about the man behind the helmet. Kansas City was not San Francisco. The Chiefs had not won a playoff game in nearly a decade. Their last championship had been Super Bowl IV, more than 20 years earlier. The franchise was respectable but unremarkable, a perennial contender that never quite broke through. They had a solid defense, a capable roster, and a fan base that was desperate for something to believe in. What they did not have was a quarterback who could take them to the promised land. And then Montana walked through the door. The impact was immediate and electric. Montana brought a legitimacy to the Chiefs that no free agent signing or draft pick could replicate. He was joined by running back Marcus Allen, another future Hall of Famer who had been exiled from the Los Angeles Raiders. And suddenly, Kansas City had two legendary players who had been discarded by their former teams and were burning with the desire to prove the doubters wrong. Montana's first season in Kansas City was a revelation. He went 11-5 as a starter, leading the Chiefs to their first division title in 22 years. He earned his 8th and final Pro Bowl selection. He threw for nearly 3,000 passing yards with 21 touchdowns and just 10 interceptions, numbers that would have been impressive for a 25-year-old quarterback, let alone a 37-year-old coming off 2 years of inactivity and elbow surgery. The playoffs provided one last signature Montana moment. In the divisional round against the Houston Oilers, the Chiefs trailed and the game was slipping away. Montana, hobbling and hurting, drove Kansas City down the field and threw a go-ahead touchdown pass that kept the season alive. The Chiefs won and advanced to the AFC Championship game against the Buffalo Bills, a team that was making its 4th consecutive Super Bowl appearance. Montana was brilliant in the first half against Buffalo, throwing 3 touchdown passes and giving Kansas City a lead that seemed insurmountable. But late in the third quarter, he took a devastating hit that left him with a concussion he could not return. Backup Steve Bono came in, and without Montana's magic, the Chiefs collapsed. Buffalo rallied to win 30-13. Montana watched the final minutes from the sideline, his helmet off, his eyes glassy, knowing that his last realistic chance at a 5th Super Bowl ring had just evaporated. The 1994 season was Montana's final act. He started 9 games, went 7-2 as a starter, and threw for 2,864 yards with 16 touchdowns. The Chiefs made the playoffs again, but lost in the first round to the Miami Dolphins. Montana threw 3 interceptions in that game, a painful ending for a man whose career had been defined by the absence of mistakes in big moments. He retired in April of 1995. The announcement was quiet, dignified, and unmistakably Montana. No tears, no theatrics. Just a man walking away from the game on his own terms, with 4 Super Bowl rings on his fingers and the knowledge that he had left everything he had on every field he had ever played. When the San Francisco 49ers played the Kansas City Chiefs in 1994, the sports bars in San Francisco were divided. Some fans cheered for the home team. Others, against every instinct of local loyalty, found themselves rooting for the visiting quarterback in the red Chiefs jersey. Because Joe Montana was not just a 49ers legend, he was their quarterback. He would always be their quarterback, no matter what jersey he wore. Montana finished his career with 40,551 passing yards, 273 touchdowns, and a career passer rating of 92.3. He went 117-47 as a starter. He engineered 31 fourth-quarter comebacks. He held every major career postseason passes record at the time of his retirement. And he never, across 122 attempts in 4 Super Bowl games, threw a single interception. The boy from Monongahela, the 7th-string freshman at Notre Dame, the 3rd-round pick that 81 teams passed on, the man they told to retire after back surgery. The quarterback who was traded from the only home he had ever known walked up from football as one of the greatest competitors the sport has ever produced, and maybe the greatest quarterback of all. Step back far enough from Joe Montana's career, and what emerges is not a collection of statistics or a list of championships. It is a single, continuous thread that runs from a tire swing in a Monongahela backyard to the biggest stages in American sports, and it never once changes its fundamental character. The thread is composure, not the absence of pressure, but the complete mastery of it. Think about the arc. A skinny kid in a coal mining town throws footballs through a tire because his father tells him accuracy matters more than arm strength. That same kid sits 7th on the depth chart at Notre Dame and waits 3 years for his chance. When the chance comes, it comes in the worst possible circumstances. In a frozen stadium in Dallas with the flu ravaging his body and a 22-point deficit on the scoreboard. He eats chicken soup and wins. He wins because he has always believed he would. He enters the NFL as a third-round pick, dismissed by scouts who worship physical tools he does not possess. He learns a system designed for a quarterback with his exact skill set, and he masters it so thoroughly that the system becomes synonymous with his name. He wins a Super Bowl in his 3rd year. He wins another 3 years later. He survives a back injury that doctors say should end his career, returns 8 weeks later, and throws 3 touchdowns. He wins a 3rd Super Bowl with the most clutch drive in the history of the championship game. He wins a 4th by putting up the most dominant performance any quarterback has ever delivered on football's grandest night. And when his body finally betrays him, when the elbow gives out, and a younger, stronger quarterback takes his job, he does not sulk. He does not retire into bitterness. He goes to Kansas City and leads a moribund franchise to its first division title in more than 2 decades, earns 1 more Pro Bowl, and comes within a concussion of playing for a 5th championship. Across 15 seasons, Montana sustained a level of postseason excellence that may never be replicated. His career playoff passer rating of 95.6 was the best of his era by a wide margin. He won his last 4 Super Bowls in a span of 9 years, a stretch of sustained dominance that only Tom Brady has approached in the decades since. And the way he won, the precision, the calm, the refusal to panic when every circumstance demanded panic, that is what elevated Montana beyond statistics and into mythology. Only a handful of players in the history of the NFL have combined individual brilliance with team success at the level Montana achieved. He was the engine of a dynasty that won 4 championships and could have won 5 or 6 if injuries had broken differently. He transformed the West Coast offense from a schematic curiosity into the dominant philosophy of modern football. He proved that the quarterback position was not about arm strength or size or 40-yard dash times. It was about decision-making, accuracy, and the ability to perform when the margins were smallest and the stakes were highest. His influence echoes through every quarterback who followed. Tom Brady grew up idolizing Montana and modeled his game after him. Peyton Manning studied Montana's pre-snap reads. Patrick Mahomes channels Montana's improvisational brilliance on every scramble drill. The West Coast offense that Walsh designed for Montana became the foundation of modern passing concepts across the entire league. And yet what lingers most is not the schematic influence or the statistical records. It is the image. Montana in the huddle at the 8-yard line, pointing out John Candy while the world holds its breath. Montana rolling right at Candlestick, launching a pass into the sky that Dwight Clark somehow brings down. Montana walking out of a locker room in Dallas, bundled in blankets and full of chicken soup, with 6 seconds left and a game to win. The image is always the same. A man who is completely, impossibly calm when the moment demands everything. The conversation about the greatest quarterback in NFL history always begins and ends with the same small group of names. Tom Brady, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning, John Elway, Johnny Unitas. Each of them has a legitimate claim. Each of them carried a franchise on his shoulders and defined an era of professional football. And any attempt to rank them requires acknowledging that the sport changed dramatically across the decades in which they played. Tom Brady's resume is staggering. 7 Super Bowl championships, 5 Super Bowl MVP awards, the most passing yards and touchdowns in NFL history, a longevity that defied biology. Brady played until he was 45 years old and was still winning championships in his mid-40s. By the raw numbers, Brady's case is overwhelming, and anyone who dismisses it is not paying attention. But numbers require context. Brady played the majority of his career under rules that were specifically designed to protect quarterbacks and enhance passing offenses. The illegal contact rules, the roughing the passer penalties, the defenseless receiver protections, all of these changes made it easier to throw the football than it had been during Montana's era. Brady was brilliant within his era. Montana was brilliant within an era that was significantly harder for quarterbacks. Peyton Manning brought an intellectual dimension to the position that may be unmatched. His ability to read defenses at the line of scrimmage, to audible into the perfect play, to control every aspect of the offense before the snap, was a form of genius that transformed how the position was played. Manning won 2 Super Bowls, 5 MVP awards, and held nearly every major passing record before Brady surpassed him. But Manning's postseason record, 9-11 in the playoffs with frequent early exits, is the asterisk that his supporters can never fully erase. John Elway was the most physically gifted quarterback of his generation. He could throw the ball 70 yards on a rope and outrun linebackers in the open field. He dragged mediocre Broncos rosters to 3 Super Bowls in the late 1980s before finally winning 2 at the end of his career. Elway's raw talent may have exceeded Montana's, but Elway lost 3 Super Bowls by a combined score of 136-40 before he won his first. Montana never lost one, and that is the core of Montana's case. 4 Super Bowls, 4 victories, 4 championships, 0 interceptions. No other quarterback has played in that many Super Bowls without losing. No other quarterback has gone through 4 championship games without throwing a single pick. The argument against Montana is always about era and circumstance, that he played for a great coach, that he had great receivers, that the system made him look better than he was. But that argument crumbles under the weight of the evidence. Bill Walsh coached the same system with other quarterbacks and never reached the heights he achieved with Montana. Jerry Rice was brilliant with Steve Young as well, but Young's Super Bowl passer rating did not approach Montana's. The system did not make Montana. Montana made the system. What separates Montana from every other name in the conversation is something that cannot be measured by any statistic or captured by any highlight reel. It is the absolute certainty, shared by teammates, opponents, and coaches alike, that when the game was on the line, there was no one on the planet you would rather have behind center. Not Brady, not Manning, not Elway, Montana. Collinsworth said it from the opposing sideline. Cross said it from the center position. Cragen said it from the defensive line of the losing team. The consensus was not built by analysts debating statistics on television. It was built by the men who played against him, who spent entire games trying to stop him, and who walked off the field shaking their heads because they could not. 4-0 in the Super Bowl. 122 passes without an interception on the biggest stage. A career passer rating of 127.8 in championship games. 31 fourth-quarter comebacks. The catch, the drive, the chicken soup game. When you weigh the evidence, not just the numbers but the moments, not just the wins but the way he won them, it becomes very difficult to place anyone above Joseph Clifford Montana Jr. He may not have the most rings, he may not have the most yards, but ring for ring, game for game, moment for moment, there is a very strong case that Joe Montana was the greatest quarterback who ever lived. Joe Montana was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio, in the year 2000. He was a first ballot selection, as inevitable an honor as any that the sport has ever bestowed. His number 16 jersey hangs retired at Levi's Stadium, a permanent reminder of the man who built a dynasty from a third-round draft pick and a revolutionary offensive system. From a tire swing in Monongahela to a standing ovation at the Superdome, from seventh-string freshman to four-time champion, from chicken soup in a frozen locker room to John Candy in the end zone. The story of Joe Montana is the story of a man who was never the most talented, never the strongest, never the one with the best arm, and who beat everyone anyway. Because when the moment was its biggest, nobody else on the planet was as calm, as precise, or as relentless as Joe Cool. If this story captivated you, wait until you hear about the man who had to follow in his footsteps. The rivalry between Montana and Steve Young is one of the most fascinating quarterback controversies the NFL has ever seen. That story is coming next, and trust us, you do not want to miss it.